Just to give you a little bit of background on me, I'm Holly Whitaker. I'm a learning strategy consultant with D2L, which means that my core body of expertise related to change management, I'm widely published in change management and that sort of thing, is leading change management in higher education. And so I've heard a lot of good, I've heard a lot of bad, I've seen a lot of good, I've seen a lot of bad. And Ben and I just wanted to come on today, glean some of those little things from you guys, share our nuggets of wisdom and what we've seen really work in the last year and what we've seen really fail as part of the change management in the last year. So Ben, I'll hand it over to you to just give a little introduction to who you are and what you do, and then we'll jump right in.
Thank you, Holly. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Campbell. I'm the Senior Director of Solutions Engineering at D2L. And for those of you who aren't privy to the corporate titling that happens often in the ed tech world, I manage a team that sort of sits between sales and marketing and product for the D2L company, and employ 30 ed tech experts from Whistler, BC down to Tampa, Florida, so covering all of North America. And I've been at D2L for about 8 years now, and actually seen. I've worked with our higher education group, I've worked with our K-12 group, I've worked with our corporate group, and I've gotten to see a lot of the intersection points that are taking place across those different historical segments in the space. And prior to D2L, I spent about 10 years in higher education myself as an instructional designer and online program manager for the University of Florida, go Gators, and Cal Berkeley.
Awesome. Lots of good experience there, Ben. So in your wide experience in higher ed, what are some of those cliches that you've heard passed around about leading change in higher ed? Like, one of the things that I've seen done, I've heard it in every leadership class I've ever taken, and it is when you come into an organization as a manager, top level leader, a director, don't change anything for the first year. I've heard that time and time again. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that's still an effective strategy, like with knowing what we've seen in the last year?
I think if you started a job a year ago and didn't plan to change anything, you'd be in a real difficult spot right now.
Totally agree.
It's interesting. So I feel like that kind of conventional wisdom can vary. And I think within the higher education context, in many cases, the cliche is that it moves about as fast or turns about as fast as an aircraft carrier, is one of the cliches I've heard. And in that context, I can see the potential for wanting to spend quite a bit of time, maybe even a full year, trying to get perspective around what's going on and what's the institutional knowledge and what are, how are all the gears interconnected within the organization. But I think that maybe misses the mark in some cases. I think there's a real opportunity for folks to spend some time surveying the field and getting a perspective on what's available. But then, recognizing that in your first, 100 or 200 or maybe 250 days, you kind of have the bully pulpit. And there's a bit of an expectation that you have a little more political sway than you might, once the flow continues to go back in the direction that maybe it started before. Everybody's looking to impress the boss. Everybody's looking to get their good first impression. And that person who's coming in really has an opportunity, I would say, to shake things up a little bit. And yeah, Anna Maria, it can be like walking through mud, but I think in those early days, sometimes you really have more opportunity and potentially more agency than you will in that year too, because by then everything's the mud has sort of congealed again.
I totally agree with that. I was going to add to that. When I started my previous position, I was coming in and I was hired with a very specific set of things to do. And then we got a new director. We had several new executives come on, and I thought, let's get them on board with championing the change that I was hired by the previous executives to do. And then it was like the big breaks were put on by this 1 year learning mission. And I was like, you've missed your sweet spot for changing things. Like, when a new person comes in, there's kind of this unfreezing moment. And I heard people talk about this on afterward in the years, like, we'll see what, Dr. So-and-so brings to the table. We're ready for that. And then they wait, and then it's like everybody refreezes back. And then there's this big change initiative, and there's all this resistance because everybody's kind of refrozen. So I kind of think that one's a little bit baloney, maybe like the first 90 days, you said 100 days. I think there's something to that. But yeah, what do you think about this, Ben? Because I've heard this, and I've followed this one too. Work with people that want to work with you, and everybody else kind of comes along in their own time. Do you feel like that still applies in this era, or have you seen that work?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think in my perspective, in terms of how do you influence change? Let's talk about technology change and how it influences pedagogy. I think in those sorts of cases, absolutely. I think you look for the folks who are doing the interesting things, and you ride that and spotlight that in every way you know how. Mm-hmm. Draw attention to that. Focus on the energy that folks are putting in this, and the return they're actually getting, and that actually is going to draw folks, I think, into that momentum state of let's change things up. Hey, that person, you start to measure yourself against somebody else, and then that often is a motivator. That's a social engineering tactic of saying, hey, mm-hmm. These folks are progressing, and I feel like I'm sort of stagnating. How do I get there? And so I think by focusing on those folks who are willing to push the envelope a little bit, I think there's a real opportunity to ride that momentum and build on that energy.
For sure. Faculty trust faculty more than any other group on campus. So if you can say, hey, Dr. So-and-so's really had success with this approach, those early adopters, then I think you'll start to see that momentum happen even faster. Those success stories really do matter. And I want to go to something Barbara's got in the chat there. What's interesting to her, let me jump into the change. What's interesting to one person might cause fear in somebody else. Who decides what kind of things are interesting? I think that's a good point when we're talking about things that entice and create really a desire for some kind of innovation. If you're looking at that ADKAR model, the D of that model is desire. What makes somebody want that thing? That's different for everybody. And I think when you talk about an innovation in terms of a problem and a solution, like, well, we're having problems with this, so here's the solution. Everybody it's like a diamond, and everybody sees a little different facet of that problem. So they're going to need to hear something a little bit different about the solution that's going to make them curious enough to want to jump in, want to jump on board. What do you think? Because we're getting some interesting things in the chat. So everybody just jump in the chat. What are the cliches that you have heard about leading change in higher ed? Ben, go ahead. I talked over you.
I was going to say, while those are coming in, could you expound on the ADKAR model a little bit, just to provide some scaffolding?
Yeah. Thanks for that. So if you want to Google ADKAR, that is a model for leading, one of the many models for leading change. And the A is awareness. People need to be aware that there's an innovation that's coming down the pike at them. And then we're thinking D as desire. You have to kind of position that innovation as something that people want. It's a solution to a problem. It's going to give you capabilities you didn't have before. Don't you want this? You really kind of have to whet someone's appetite. It's kind of the same thing as people parading that nice sizzling plate of fajitas through the Mexican food restaurant because you're like, ooh, maybe I want fajitas. It's creating that desire. And the K of that ADKAR model is knowledge. Then people need to know what it is that they have to do to start using that innovation. A is ability, when they start actually using that innovation, and then R is reinforcement. So how do you keep people using that innovation? So so thanks, Kristen. I appreciate that. Kristen Palmer, thank you, because she's just left that ProSci link there in the chat. So when we think about desire and helping people want that innovation, that problem solution kind of a format, kind of can it's like the carrot versus the stick. You kind of want to keep people carrot moving forward rather than stick saying you have to do this. So I think that in the last year with COVID, I think those two things have become more and more similar, that you want to do this and you have to do this, that mandate. A lot of people won't adopt until there is a mandate, which is sad but true. Ben, what are your thoughts? I've said a lot of words. I just want to pitch it back over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe pivoting to the past year is a worthwhile opportunity, because historically, yes, you know, it's easy to get stuck in the mud, and it's easy to say that it's too onerous to try and change things. It's too onerous to to define a goal, and we're all going to get lined up and we're going to follow, you know, we're going to track towards that goal and we're going to measure our progress toward that goal. A year ago, the game changed for a lot of folks, and there's a lot of folks who really, you know, like I think about my dad. My dad was a 30-year public school teacher. He retired for 3 years, kind of went a little crazy, and then decided to go back to teaching. And now he's like 7 years into teaching private school, you know, 40 something years into teaching chemistry, high school, and chemistry and physics. And early March of last year, you guys probably remember March of last year, I had a meeting actually at the University of Florida, and I was visiting my parents in Orlando. And Sunday night about 8 o'clock, I sit down with my dad, and he's like, "So I have to put my stuff in Google Classroom. Do you know what that means?" It's like, "Yeah, Dad, I have an almost doctorate in curriculum and instruction with technology. I'm familiar with that concept." And I spent an hour and a half trying to get my dad's head around, you know, my dad is an expert teacher. He's had, you know, students win the Westinghouse Science Prize and things like that. He'd never, ever, ever put anything on the internet to supplement his instruction. And so for him, I mean, paradigm shift doesn't even really cut it. It's like, you've been doing this for 40 years in English. Now I want you to do it in Spanish. And he had until the end of spring break to figure it out. And so that kind of forcing function, that's sort of changed the tactics of how folks have to do things. I think, in my opinion, maybe I'm being optimistic about this, I think it is affording us opportunities for more rapid intervention going forward. Mm-hmm. I think it's sort of got folks from 0 to 1 in terms of thinking, okay, technology isn't something that I have to push away or be afraid of or be intimidated by, but something that I could actually find some value in. And then maybe if I can find some value in it, maybe there's more value to be found further down the line. And now he's, you know, a year later, he's an old pro online instructor, and, you know, he's come up with some really interesting ways of doing things, and he's figuring out how to use his camera that he used to use in the classroom, you know, in his house, and, you know, those kinds of things that sort of forced these pivots, and then over time force you to respect or reflect on how that's changed your practice.
Yeah, so Christina has asked a very interesting question in the chat. So if you want to scroll up to that, because I want to tackle that one next. How would you convince the traditionalists who want to return to pre-COVID methods, even if COVID-related changes were beneficial? I think this is such an interesting question. And I'm working with several groups on this very question right now. And it's kind of this idea of, Ben, just like your dad, like there's been some really cool shifts in some things, and it's created this moment where, yes, we've seen this mass influx to online teaching. Now, I think that the expertise that teachers especially have found with this, if I read the people that I'm working with, at least kind of correctly in this situation, they're starting to find the gaps in the systems and be frustrated with them a little bit. Like, why doesn't it do this? Why won't it do that next thing? And and then there's another shift, like when we're probably going to be back on campus in some level, fingers crossed, in fall term. So then I think there's going to be a big tendency to want to go backwards. But how do you then get people going forward? And I think that it's exactly that. A word that you said really resonated with me. It's value. What is the value that you have found as a teacher of how online can help extend either the time you are available? Because I certainly do not want to be teaching and answering student emails at 10 p.m. I am like sound asleep in bed then. But also at the same time, so like leaving resources online can expand the time that students can engage with you, but also the geography that you can reach as well. It expands that. So students can be with you and learn anytime, anywhere. And you've got students in extracurriculars and students who may have challenges with school attendance, who are then able to completely engage in your classroom anytime, anywhere, which is really kind of cool. And all the effort that people have put in the last year doesn't just get taken away and blanked out, but you can selectively use some of the resources to amplify what you're already doing in the classroom. How do you leave additional resources for people that are struggling? How do you selectively release some things? You know, let's say a student does poorly on question number 4. Well, I just did a 30-minute thing in January. It's still recorded. I'm going to release it to you because it's going to help you with the concept connected to question number 4. I think that there's going to be a lot of brainstorming around how to bring people back to that. And it's all about value. What value, dear teacher, did you discover? How can you reuse some of those efforts to create value that extends the time and geography that you're available? What do you think? I just, again, said a lot of words. What do you think?
I love what you just said. It actually, I'm not afraid of folks going back to the way it was before. I'm genuine, like I'm not concerned with that. I don't think that's the problem that we need to solve necessarily. I think that sort of transition from 0 to 1, the, hey, I'm never going to do anything online, or I'm never really going to think about how this could augment my instructional practice. I don't think we have to answer that question anymore. Like, and I think that's like a fundamental shift in how educators are going to think about instruction going forward. I think because there's a recognition that maybe this isn't the same experience. It's absolutely not the same experience. If anybody tries to tell you that learning online is like learning in person, they're just lying. This is not true.
Yeah.
But I think the thinking that instructors have had to go through to figure out, how do I recreate the value, to your point, of those things that I thought were important and instrumental in my ability to deliver instruction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're thinking about those things in more of a metacognitive way. You know, like that was my behavior. That was my familiar thing that I always did. And then when you have to do it differently, it makes you think about the delta between before and after. Like, you don't even have to like think, hey, I'm going to change, you know, like you don't have to proactively say, I'm going to change the way I do things. You're just like, well, I did it before this way and I did it now this way. And I can kind of measure the differences in that. And maybe you can't necessarily as easily measure the learning outcomes in some cases because you don't have the skills to, you know, structure that in an online way, but you have an opportunity to really reflect on your practice. I mean, I love that concept of signature pedagogy. Like you know, you can picture a biology teacher no matter who you are. If you've been through high school or university, like, you know what a biology teacher kind of looks and feels like. And you can sort of predict elements of that instructional style. And I've always been interested in this idea of, can you create a signature pedagogy for online instruction? And I don't necessarily think you can. I think it's sort of this mixture of the discipline and the technical efficacy and the willingness to challenge things. There were some great comments in the chat about, you know, like being willing to push up against the familiar. And I think folks feel like they have some agency and some confidence in that ability that they probably didn't have before.
I totally agree with that. And that just comes with the experience. So from a change management perspective, I think it's really difficult to take back something that's been given. And I think that administrators tend to think a lot from the faculty perspective because they were most recently faculty.
Yep.
My stepson will be attending Texas Tech University in the fall, and his cousin's already there. She's in her 2nd year. And so she's had a full year of COVID life at university. And so we were on our campus visit and we were having supper with her. And she said, you know what, I think it's going to be really weird because Texas Tech is doing that model where the students come into class only on certain days. So she's a Monday student in one of her class and a Wednesday student in a different class, and then online the rest of the time. She said, I think it's going to be so weird when I'm able to and expected to go back to campus every day. Students expect there to be an online presence in a class now. They've had it for a year. My stepson has had some form of Google Classroom since about 4th grade. Like, they expect it, they want it. And if it's not part of the class, it's almost like his cousin was looking professors kind of like, yeah, if there's not an online section of the course, or there's not a way to participate online, she's like, I may just, opt for the online section, because it's just such a part of her life now. So I think as a theme, when we consider going back, you have to think about and integrate that student perspective in the middle of all of this too. What do the students want, and how do they want to participate in campus life when it comes to class? I think that you've really got to integrate that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love what Kristen just said about this feeling like a Dan Ariely kind of moment. One of the things that this is kind of drawn out for me for a while. So the gentleman, he actually just did a session, just finished the session an hour ago, Dr. Colin Marler. He's the Chief Learning Officer for North Central University. He's written some really interesting peer-reviewed work around technology change being or technology transition being a forcing function in moving the needle forward with respect to instructional delivery. Pedagogy and andragogy, like you have an opportunity in the face of a technology shift to kind of level the playing field. And I think that's really interesting now, because before COVID, there were some folks who were really confident in their ability to deliver online instruction. There were plenty of folks who were doing it, but maybe didn't feel great about how they were doing it. But now they're the experts. Like I think about my wife. We decided a couple of years ago we wanted to do homeschool for our young kids, because they're like this weird age where like they can't be in the same school. And so we decided, hey, we're just going to spend a year doing homeschool. And then when COVID hit, my wife became the expert in doing homeschool, because everybody had to do it. And then they're all calling my wife, or sending her Facebook messages to say, hey, what curriculum are you using? Or how are you doing this? And how do you address these things? And she like hadn't felt any confidence in it at all before. And then because she was even 8 months ahead of the curve, so to speak, she felt like she had a doctorate in homeschool, and she's a therapist. Like she doesn't do that for a living. But I think there's an interesting sort of transition that happened that kind of brought everybody to the same level of like, okay, now we're here and this is what we've got to deal with. Let's rally together and figure out how we can build on each other. There's sort of an implied level of collaboration and interaction that I don't necessarily think was there before, because there wasn't this sort of forced level of humility, if that makes sense. Like everybody hadn't been knocked down a peg to say, okay, now we've got to learn the stuff that we were pushing against for a long time. Now we don't have a choice whether we want to push against it anymore. Like we have to embrace it. And so it's been a kind of a leveling function in that sense. But I think it also I think in the future, we're going to look back on this year and say, this was the year that made learning online something that not only was acceptable, but actually was kind of the knee of the curve in terms of how folks can leverage technology to deliver instruction. I
totally agree with that. We're kind of closing in on our time here. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's joined us. And thematically speaking, change management is about relationships, and it's about support. It's about communication. And I think we've seen that throughout today. It's about people having support and help for making a transition of any kind, in alignment with whatever that institutional vision is. So if that vision is to offer a variety of education, there has to be support for that. There has to be more communication about that than normal in order for people to make that transition confidently, because we don't want people to make transitions out of bitterness or out of anger. We want them to desire, like we talked about as part of that ADKAR model. We want them to want it. We want them to willingly embrace it, as Ben had just said. And I just love that how generous you guys have been in the chat today. We really appreciate that. And Ben, do you have any parting shots for us today about leading change and as we move forward, hopefully with an on-campus fall, fingers crossed?
I don't. I mean, honestly, I think I think sometimes you can be proactive, and I think you can define a direction, and then sometimes life just hands you something different and you have to deal with it. And sometimes it's the hardest thing you've ever done. And then you get to look back on it and say, I can't imagine how things would have continued in that direction without this sort of precipitous change. And I'm excited about it, to be
Very
honest.
true. I love that. I love that. I think in 5 years, we're going to look back and go, maybe that wasn't so bad and it really helped us move forward. It really helped us meet students where they are. It really helped us as people, as faculty, as teachers, to wrestle with who we really are. And with that, I'm going to hand her back to Barbara to wrap us up and send us off today.
All I can say is 30 minutes was not nearly enough time for the excitement and the engagement that we saw in this particular setting. I hope everyone enjoyed their time together for a Friday afternoon, very engaged group. Obviously, we hit a nerve, but I can honestly say I think resilience is the name of the game. And if we can be change agents and leaders in that way and show our resilience, willingness, and ability to adapt, others can't help but follow suit, or at least try very hard to do the same. Thank you all for attending. Ben, Holly, truly appreciate the time today. And everyone who came out to participate, please make sure you fill out the review form. That's the only way we know if we need more time in sessions like this for the engagement. And if next year the stars align and everyone's resilient and the virus finds a place to go dump itself somewhere else and never hurt anybody again, we may all get the chance to be face to face so we can enjoy that kind of interaction. But until then, this has been a great session, and thank you all for being with us.
Yes,
Thank you so much, everybody.
please do stop by the virtual hall and visit with D2L. They've been a great supporter of OLC, and I'm sure they love to visit more with you. Thank you, Barbara, our session chair. If you are interested in volunteering for OLC conferences, helping out the way Barbara is, or other areas, please reach out to one of our team members or visit the link under the Get Involved tab on our website. Thank you all and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.